Nuts and bolts with Tone here, guys. Welcome to my channel. Today I have a 2016 Ram Promaster with a 3.6 liter engine, and it has blown head gaskets. I'm going to show you how to replace these head gaskets. Now in the Ram Promaster, it's going to be a little bit different because the engine drops out the bottom, and we're going to be doing the head gaskets sitting on the floor. So a little different than if you had a Jeep or something else, you would do it in the car. The harness would stay, things like that. So there's going to be a lot of stuff out of the way in this one that wouldn't normally be, it would be in a different orientation in your vehicle if you're doing it in the car. So let's get started.
Now in this one here, the engine drops out the bottom and you have to take the cats out while it's in the vehicle. So before it ever drops, the cats come out. Up here, I got my Milwaukee light, the M12 underhood light, lighting it up, just giving us good lighting. And first step is going to be remove the intake plenum. That coolant hose is a click lock clamp and you need special pliers. These are by Ossenmacher AST Tools. You're going to give it a squeeze and the clamp clicks loose. Then you're going to get some heater hose pliers. I like these. They have little grippers. They grab the hose. You could twist it without damaging it and break it loose and twist it off. So here I'm just disconnecting the coils and the phasers. We have to disconnect all the electrical up top. And I like to use these multi-tool pliers right here because they give you a flat spot for leverage and it helps break things loose. I like these pliers. They're from Lyle. They're electrical disconnect pliers. You have this long section here that grabs the connector and then a skinny part here that pushes in the pin to release the connector. And it works really well. So I'm going to go ahead and use an air nozzle and blow all the dust and dirt away before I take this intake off. And then here, I'm just going to zap all the bolts, pull this lower intake off, get it out of the way. And they pop off real easy once you take the bolts out. You're going to disconnect all your little solenoids for your variable valve timing phasers. It's just 3 torques on each one. Going to get all those off. When you pop them off, be careful. They're a little heavier than you think they are. There's not a whole lot to them. And then this is the PCV that's on the rear of the right valve cover. And you have 1 cam sensor in each valve cover, just 1 Torx. And then get your valve covers off, just like that. You're going to take off the bracket here on the front of the engine. That's what your engine mount attaches to. Just 4 bolts. Comes right off, just like that. Next, you're going to have this water crossover here. Your thermostat attaches to it. Take your thermostat off because you should be doing a thermostat if you're doing head gaskets, you should be replacing your thermostat. I would never do a head gasket job without replacing the thermostat. Next up is the alternator. We got to get the alternator out of the way. You're going to zap that off. Then you're going to take your balancer bolt out and pull your balancer off. Your balancer does not need a puller, so it'll come right off. Undo all the bolts and get your water pump off. Now this one here, after close inspection, I found that the water pump is leaking from the front. It's hard to see, but you can see paint coming from the front of the water pump. Now there are 4 bolts inside of the lower oil pan. You have to take that off and pull those 4 bolts out in order to get this timing cover off. So now you got to get all your timing cover bolts out. There's 4 bolts inside the oil pan. Once you get those out, you take all your 10s around the perimeter. There's 113. And now it's time to take the timing cover off. Now in the car, this is much more difficult because you have a lot less room to pry. If you try to take the timing cover off and it feels like it's just not going, you need to get a mirror and look because a lot of times there's still 1 bolt left. Now in this case, you could see I pried in many places to get it off. Now we're going to roll the engine over until all the marks line up. So the right cams, there's going to be 2 lines that are straight across and they're going to line up with each other. Then on the outside of the sprockets are going to be arrows that point outward. That's for the right cams. Then when you come to the left side, the arrows are going to point towards each other and the outside of the sprockets are going to have the lines. Now, you can't get it backwards because the lines on the left sprockets won't line up and the arrows on the right won't line up. You're going to want to get a rag and wipe off the cams and wipe off the chain. And I also wipe off the crank sprockets and the chains at the crank because we're also going to be marking them as well. So here is the left cams. You can see the arrows line up with each other. And the marks are on the outside. Now, if you weren't sure and you tried to turn this over, the marks, they won't line up with each other. So there's no way to get it backwards. You're going to have the arrows here, and on the right cams, the lines are going to line up. Now I'm going to mark the chain. Now, since the sprocket mark is in between the links, I color the whole link on each side of the mark, and I'm going to do the same thing on that one as well. Now, it doesn't really matter where you mark your chains on the crank here. We're not marking it. There's no mark there that I'm actually going off of. There's not an actual timing mark. I'm just picking a spot where I can color the sprocket and color the chain so I can make sure they line up when I'm done. Now, sometimes when you're marking, when you have a dual chain like this and you're marking inside of two sprockets, it's hard to get the mark to where you can see it. So what I do is I put a mark on the outside of the sprocket also, so it's easier to see when you're done. You'll need a timing kit for this engine. It's going to come with 2 cam lockers like this. These are just plastic. It's going to come with a couple pins for the timing chain tensioners. We've done a lot of these, so we have multiple different pins in there for different applications. First thing, we're going to reset the chain tensioner for the right-hand chain. You're going to push the guide all the way down. And once you have it all the way down, you're going to put the pin in the tensioner and let go, and it's going to hold it. Now, the left-hand chain tensioner is a little bit different. You have to push up on a locking mechanism, and if you push the guide all the way in and put the pin in, it will not hold because the guide cannot push the tensioner all the way in the hole to where it's going to set and stay. So you can see my pry bar is up against the actual part of the plunger of the chain tensioner. You have to push that in and then put the pin in, and then it will hold. So you can see right there, the plunger is the part that sticks out further, and the flat part is the locking mechanism. And the locking mechanism is what you actually have to push in, so that way the pin will bite on the teeth and lock it in place. So now we're going to lock the cams. There's a left and a right of those blocks. Usually one goes right in. Sometimes the other one you have to use a wrench and wiggle the chain back and forth till you can get it to line up. So now, even though these locking blocks are in there, you still want to use a wrench to hold the cams. These cams, the phasers are tightened down at 118 foot-pounds. So that's pretty tight. So we're going to break all the phasers loose and make sure the oil control valves spin freely. Once you have all the bolts loose and the phasers, you're going to take the tools out. The very first YouTube video I made, that guy right there, I pretended I was teaching him how to do the job. Go ahead and remove the intake oil control valve, which is the bolt. And then while holding onto the chain, you're going to wiggle the phaser off of the cam and out from under the chain. Go ahead and set that down. And then you can slip your chain off and from around all the components. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the exhaust oil control valve and the phaser. Unbolt the fixed guide 3 bolts and slip the slipper off. Now on the right side, the tensioner stays on the block if you're not replacing it. So now for the left side, we're going to take off the oil control valve out of the exhaust sprocket on this side. Pretty much the best way to remember it is we're taking it off of the fixed side of the chain. So once you get that off, now let's go ahead and slip the chain off. Now when you put your chains down, you want to put the paint marker side up. And then now we're going to go ahead and take off the oil control valve and the phaser. So we're going to remove the fixed guide on this side. Now there's only 2 bolts and it has a pin. Then we're going to slip the slipper off. And then on this side, we're taking the tensioner off because it's in the head. So watch the cam at the bottom of the screen and you'll see it spring as I'm loosening it up. So you want to just loosen this up uniformly. Maybe hold it with a wrench so it doesn't spring too far. And then you're just going to remove all the cam caps, but don't get them mixed up. Now, when you remove your cams and your rocker arms, you want to really inspect all the cam journals. These engines are notorious for lifter failure, cam failure, rocker arm failure, and you want to make sure that all your cam lobes are smooth. Before you send your heads to the machine shop, you want to pull your rocker arms off and pull your lifters out. And don't mix them up. Make sure you put them all exactly how they were, just so it all wears the same. And you want to really inspect your rocker arms to make sure that the bearings are okay. Make sure that the roller sits nice and it isn't low, because those things fail. And you can use a magnet just to grab the tip of the lifter. Sometimes you have to wiggle it a little bit, and then you can just pull them out that way. So they shouldn't it shouldn't be hard to pull them out.
So here is the torque spec. So here's the heads right here. This points to the front. So there's your torque sequence. Here's your procedure right here. 22 foot-pounds, 33 foot-pounds, 33 foot-pounds, 125 degrees. You're gonna loosen all of them. 22 foot-pounds, 33 foot-pounds, again at 33 foot-pounds, and 130 degrees. That is your head torque right there. So I'm just gonna do this right here. You can kind of look at the torque specs for the engine. I'll try to explain some of these as I go, but just in case I forget, most of the torque specs are on here. So I can't stress this enough. The very first thing that you want to do is you want to spray out all of your holes for your head bolts. Okay, so like this one had a bunch of crap in it. This one was literally filled to the top with oil right there. So I had like 3 on each head. So you want to clean, then spray them all out, get them all clean. Then you want to clean your head surface, make sure everything's clean. Wipe out the inside of your cylinders that you can. Remember, the engine is out of time right now, so we want to leave it. You don't want to move your crank unless you have to. And if you have to, make sure that you mark it so you know exactly where it is to put this back together and be in proper time. Now, I always, while the heads are off, I always clean the timing area, the timing cover area, for one, because the heads aren't in the way. Most of the time you're doing this in the car. Well, the heads aren't in the way, so you have more room. I do this on any engine that I do. I always clean the whole timing cover area before I put the head or heads on. So in this case, I've got everything clean, kind of got the crankcase blocked right here to keep anything from falling down. And I've got it sitting on an engine dolly right now, so unfortunately, to put this timing cover on, I'm gonna have to somehow lift the engine up because I need to get this lower oil pan off, because there's 4 bolts that are inside the timing cover that have to go on when I put the cover in. So you're gonna need head bolts. So we're just using the old trusty Felpros. Got 2 sets of these. Now this is an important step. You do not oil the bolts. So it says absolutely do not add anything to the bolts, the threads, the heads, nothing. So make sure you use new head bolts. You have to use new head bolts. There's a diagram where you can measure them and all that. It's not worth it. This is a big job. You don't want to do it again. You need head bolts. So now let's get the head gaskets. So we're just using a Felpro headset. So the head gaskets are marked right and left. So you shouldn't be able to mix them up, because if you put the head gasket on, the holes won't line up either way. So next thing, you want to get your heads all prepared. Let me get these head gaskets on here, show you that part. So if you ever aren't sure, you can look at stuff like this. There is a passage right there and an engine dowel, right? So you come up here and there's an engine dowel. Well, as you can see, there is no passage there. There is a passage there. So you want to always make sure that you match up your head gaskets to your heads and try to check all the holes.
So you want to go ahead and just wipe off your heads. Make sure there's no lint. The red rags tend to leave little bits of lint around, so you want to just make sure it's all clean. And we're going to set the head on there and just have a bolt ready to just run in just to hold it in place. Now the head in the front. So the left cylinder head is the one that has the coolant temp sensor right here. And I forgot to take it out of the head when I sent it to the machine shop, so it's still here. So this is the left head. So now let's set them on. Before you put your heads on, go ahead and clean the timing cover area of your heads as well, so that way you're not having to worry about it while it's in there. So you're going to want an angle torque wrench that can measure angle. Otherwise, you're going to have to use a degree wheel, or you're going to have to use a paint marker. And for the last step of the second set is 130 degrees. That's going to be a little difficult without a degree wheel. But it was hard to keep this thing still because it was sitting on an engine stand. So you can use assembly lube, you can use oil. I almost always use oil. I actually have no idea why I was using assembly lube, maybe just because I haven't used it in a long time. But assembly lube's thicker, so you got to rub it around. Now you don't want to clog up your oil passages, and don't get anything in your bolt holes for the cam caps. So you're going to want to get all the cam journals. Now before you put your cams in, you want to put all your lifters on and your rockers on. So just lay all your lifters side by side and just drizzle oil all the way across them, rub them all over the lifters, and then slide them in. And then I like to do a dab of oil on top of each one of the lifters before I put the rockers in. You don't have to do it, but it's one of those things to where you just don't want anything to be dry. The more lubricated things are when you put it together, when you start it up, the less chance you have of a problem. So you're going to put all your rockers on, just like this. Make sure you put them the right way. Make sure they're seated. And then I also will take a dab of oil and put it on top of all the rockers before I put the cams in. Just something I like to do, just makes it easier. I know guys that don't do it and they don't have any problem, but I like to do it. So now your cams have this right here, and that is an alignment hole. Now you want that hole to be facing up on both cams. And your cams also specify whether they're left intake or exhaust or right intake or exhaust, in case you got them mixed up. So you want to make sure that you put both of the cams in. Now on the right head, when I put the cams in and I put the alignment holes straight up, they torqued and they didn't really move. Now the left side, they moved quite a bit. So we're going to go ahead and torque all the cams, and they're going to be 89 inch-pounds. Got this brand new Capri Tools mini torque wrench. I'm going to use it here. I don't need it here because I have plenty of room, but this is really great because my 1/4 inch snap-on is like this long, and you don't have enough swing in a lot of places, valve covers, intakes, things like that. So we got the mini torque wrench here. It comes with all the bits, comes with an extension, a socket for the bits.
Visiting. Okay, let's see.
All right, so I got it set to 89 inch-pounds. Super visible little screen here. On this is actually easier to read than my snap-on. So I'm going to go ahead and torque these to 89 inch-pounds. There is a sequence. Pretty much, you're just going to kind of alternate. Real nice pronounced click. I found some torque wrenches to be very light on the click, and it can be kind of hard to hear, especially if you work in a shop with a lot of people. A lot of noise. I work in a big shop, 11 guys, so it can be quite noisy in here. Right now it's very quiet, lunchtime, and we're slow. Another thing talking about torque wrenches is when you're done with a torque wrench, a click style torque wrench like this, you want to bring your torque wrench down to its lowest setting. In this case, it's 30 inch-pounds. And you want to set it to 0. You want to lock it in. If your lowest is 40, if it's 50, it doesn't matter what the lowest reading is. You want to bring it to that reading and zero it. That helps keep it calibrated. During torquing your cams, they're going to twist. So when you're all done, turn them so the alignment hole is facing straight up, because that puts the cams at top dead center for putting the phasers on. And now it's time to time the engine. All right, so if you did take the tensioner off for the right head, go ahead and put that back on. If you didn't, then great. Go ahead and put your slipper on first. Make sure it sits in the tensioner. Then you're going to put your fixed guide on. Now, I didn't really look up the torque specs for these because I don't torque them. I just go snug, just tighten them up. Same thing with the tensioner on. So you're going to make sure your tensioners are on, and then you're going to put your fixed guides on and your slippers. So I just run them in with a ratchet or with an air ratchet, and then I just snug them up with my Capri Tools ratchet. So now you're going to put the left intake phaser on. Now there's a little dimple on there, and it goes into an alignment pin on the cam. So run that in and put that bolt in snug. Now right there you can see there is a little dimple right there. Now there's also one on the cam, just so you can see how they line up. Because if you don't put them on exactly perfect, then you could mushroom that pin and then you have big problems. So now that we've got the intake cam on, we're going to go ahead and slip the chain on. Make sure your marks line up. Line it up with that one, and then you're going to take the phaser and you're going to slip it under the chain and line it up with your paint mark, and then wiggle it back and forth until you get it on the cam. Now you may have to wiggle the cam a little bit to get that phaser pin all the way in. Once the cam slides all the way on, like that, then you're going to put your bolt in, run your bolt in snug. Don't tighten it down, just run it in snug. We're going to torque it later. And so for that one, you're going to go ahead and tap your tool in. And now we're going to move on to the other side. Now on this side, since the slipper is on the exhaust side, we're going to be putting the exhaust cam sprocket on first. So you're going to time it in reverse order. So once you get your exhaust phaser on, snug the bolt, and then we're going to put your chain on and make sure all your marks line up. Now this is why pronounced paint marks are super important. They make it so easy. So this one was a little more difficult to get on. And then you're just going to run it in with your socket. It's just easier. Tap the tool in. So now this is very important. You want to make sure that your cams are lined up with your sprocket. So you see that dimple on the right, the bigger one, that's on the sprocket, on the phaser. The one on the left is on the cam. Those should line up. Same thing here. Those should line up. We're going to go to the other side, and they have the exact same dimples. Now, if these don't line up, then you'll mushroom your cams. Now, this part is super crucial before you pull any pins or anything like that. You're going to come over here, and you're going to look at your mark. So you can see that that mark right there for the right chain is exactly perfect, and it's on all the way. Now this step right here, now I did this on this one, it worked out really well. You can see that inside dot. It's a little hard to see because it's a little wide, but I marked the outside of it. So when you look straight on, that mark lines up with that link, and you know that those two marks are lined up. Then you come up here, and because we marked on both sides of the mark, there's no question as to, is this engine in time?
I used to just paint the little dot on each side of the mark, but I had where brake clean sometimes would get on and I would lose part of my paint marker. So I started marking the whole link. So now you can see there's no question as to, is this engine timed? Now the only thing that, if you have all of this right and you marked it all properly, the only way that you could have this engine out of time is if you did not get this dowel all the way in the cam and you tighten it, because then it's going to put this sprocket slightly in a different place on the cam. So alignment holes are pointed straight up, but that's just to get you in the ballpark. That's just to make sure your cams are in the right ballpark.
You can't have them 180 out because when you turn them, your valves can hit your pistons. Same thing here. So we had them pointed up. That was just to reference which way was top dead center. And then here, we're here. So now you're gonna need a wrench to hold the cam, because even though we have this block here, you can't trust this block. This block is just to help for torquing. So I'm gonna use a wrench and hold there, and a torque wrench.
You're going to torque all your phasers to 118 foot-pounds. Make sure you hold each one with a wrench. After you torque all of them, you can pull your pins out of your tensioners and take the blocks out of the cams. Now we're going to turn the engine over 2 full revolutions. That means that the cams are going to turn 2 full revolutions. So once you got your timing lined up, there should be 12 chain pins in between each sprocket mark. So count those to make sure, and that will tell you that your sprockets are in the right place.
Next up, you want to get your timing cover all ready to go. Get it all clean. You have to get gaskets for here and here. You're gonna need silicone, and you want to get your crank seal installed. Put your new crank seal in there. Make sure your outside's cleaned up. Your water pump torques through your timing cover. You got your water crossover. Gonna be putting all that on together. So once you put your timing cover in, you're gonna set it down and you have to tap on it. It's gotta go on these dowels, have to go inside of the timing cover. So it should, as you push it down and tap on it, it should set in those dowels. So we're gonna I'll show you what the silicone looks like for this to get this all ready to go.
You're gonna put silicone at all your seams, head to block, block to upper oil pan. I will run it around where the upper oil pan and the timing cover meet, just like that. And then we're also going to put it around the timing cover where it meets the engine. You're going to put it around the bolt holes. You'll see the bolt holes right there. I also put it along where the oil pan and the timing cover meet. That's the seams, all along there. And then a little bead along the tensioner, right there.
So you want to have your whole engine ready in the front. You want to have your water pump ready with a gasket. You want to have your coolant crossover here with a gasket. You want to have your engine mount bracket here and your thermostat, because all these bolts, they bolt through the timing cover. So there's a couple bolts in the water pump, a couple bolts in the coolant crossover that bolt it to the timing cover. The rest of them bolt through the timing cover. So you got all these. And then you got to make sure that you do these 5 that go underneath. Right here, I had to use a cherry picker, lift up the engine, drop the lower oil pan off, and I still have to reseal the lower oil pan once I get the engine back in the van. But you can see I like to put a paint marker when I've torqued the bolt so I can go back through. Now on this one, it's not so critical because I can sit back and look at this whole engine. But a lot of times this is in the car, so I use a mirror. And I run a mirror all around the perimeter, and I make sure that every bolt has a paint mark on it. And as long as it has a paint mark on it, then I know I torqued it. So you got 40 foot-pounds on this thing here. You got 18 foot-pounds on this 13 right here, and the 513s that go up into the timing cover. All your 10s right here are 106 inch-pounds around the perimeter of the timing cover. Your water pump and your coolant crossover are all 97 inch-pounds, and your thermostat is 106 inch-pounds. So once you have all that done, then the front is torqued. The only thing I don't have on right now is the idler pulley because everything's buried and I can't remember where it is. Got to put my balancer on. You want to lube the outside of your balancer before you slide it on so it doesn't tear the seal. When you're getting your valve covers ready to go, you want to go ahead and change your spark plug tube seals because, well, you don't want to do it again and you don't want them to leak. Anyways, what I use is a 24 millimeter. So to take them out, you flip them over and you just put a screwdriver right on the one side and you hit it, and they'll usually pop out one hit. And then you're going to use your socket here and just tap it around, and you'll hear the sound when it bottoms out. And then when you flip it over, you can look and you'll see that it's the same. You can look like that and it'll look the same all the way around. So then you're going to go ahead and get your gasket set up. Make sure you wipe all this off with brake clean. Right here at the seam, cut your silicone with a razor blade, get a nice cut, and then put a dab of silicone along each seam right there on both sides. And then we're going to torque those down to 106 inch-pounds. So I'm putting silicone along the seams there, and I also take a little bit of Sil Glide and I rub it around the spark plug tubes. So that way when the valve cover goes on, it doesn't tear the tube seals and they slide on nice and easy. Because you don't want those to leak, because then it's a hot mess, you get a misfire, and it always seems it's the one under the plenum that happens on. 106. So 106 inch-pounds. If you forget to put your seals in for your variable valve timing phaser solenoids, then you have to do it after you put the valve covers in. So you're just going to put new seals in, and you're just going to run those little solenoids in just snug. I run them in with a little zap gun, and then I come back with a ratchet, and I just give them a nice little snug just to make sure. You know, I like to use a ratchet for the final because it's small and it doesn't put a lot of torque. The zap gun can put too much torque. Now it's time to put your cam sensors in. Now I generally don't change the seals for the cam sensors because they're really hard to get back in the hole properly and they generally don't leak. So you're going to put those in, just run them in snug. Now those bolts stay with the cam sensor. And then you have your PCV and you're going to put that in. That goes on the back of the right valve cover of the exhaust cam valve cover. So go ahead and slide your lower intake in, and you're just going to run the bolts down evenly and snug them down, and then get those torqued to spec. The Capri Tools mini torque wrench came in clutch. I used it for this entire job. Put your brackets and new gaskets for your cats on. With the right pliers, connecting click lock clamps is as simple as that, like butter.
So from here, you're going to put your upper intake on. It's going to be 89 inch-pounds. You're going to want to get your brackets on here. Go ahead and get those on. And then from here, you have to put all your coolant hoses, all your harnesses, everything in place. You got a bracket that goes back here. So you're going to get all that on. And then you'll be good to go.
So the last thing on this engine is you're going to go ahead and put your lower oil pan on. You're going to do it with silicone. You just want to make sure you clean it really well. This one is 93 inch-pounds. After watching this video, you should feel pretty confident in doing head gaskets on a 3.6 liter Chrysler engine. So it's not super difficult. You know, you got to have the special tools, you got to have the procedure, and you got to make sure you torque everything. Just like anything, when you take cam sprockets off, things like that, you need to make sure you torque them. So anyways, thanks for watching the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you definitely don't want to miss. See you next time.